Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. Today we're going to go into the book of 1 Kings, the 7th chapter. And in this chapter, it's mainly going into the details of the construction and the building of, some of the things that were, or some of the sectors and parts that were in King Solomon's palace, right, in his house. And then also, it goes into the buildings, the furnishings of the temple, right? So we covered the actual building, the structure, the foundation of the temple of the Lord. But now, it goes into like some of the actual materials that were in the temple, right? The table, the shewbread, the table for the shewbread, the menorah, and the basins in which they would put the water to wash and clean, the sacrifices and all of those things, right? So that's pretty much what is covered at a high level in this chapter here. So a good portion of it is just sort of just going through with those measurements and so on and so forth. So this is the book of 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 1. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. He built also the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits. Now, not to be, don't get it confused, right? There are certain verses in here that mention house, but in particular, it's really referring to like a section, right? Or a chamber or a portion, okay? So in the first verse, it is his house, the palace, right? But as we go down, it has there's different parts that are included in that palace. Starting off here with the house of the forest of Lebanon, okay? So as it says here, verse 2 again, he built also the house, Slaki, the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams upon the pillars. And we already went through the benefit of cedar and why it was so frequently used in building projects. Verse 3. And it was covered with cedar above the beams, and lay on 45 pillars, 15 in a row. And there were windows in 3 rows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. And all the doors and posts were square, with the windows, and the light was against the light in 3 ranks. So like facing each other, basically. And he made a porch of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits. And the porch was before them, and the other pillars and the thick beam were before them. And as you read through chapters like this, where there's a lot of measurements and stuff, you really have to use your imagination, because at this point in time, right, even the best 3D models that you'll find online are at best just a depiction of somebody else's imagination of these measurements here, right? So we don't actually know exactly what this looked like, but there are some close illustrations out there if you want a visual, right? Just type that in. Verse 7, then he made a porch for the throne where he might judge, right? So he had the pillar, the house of the forest of Lebanon, right? This hall, right? This long hall that had these cedar pillars and these windows and so on. Then you had this section, right? Of, as it says here, where the throne might be, where he will judge, right? It says, even the porch of judgment, and it was covered with cedar from one side of the floor to the other. And his house where he dwelt had another court within the porch, which was of like work. So once again, this is like another section or another chamber of this giant palace you can imagine. And it makes sense why it took him 13 years building that, right? So it says here, which is of like work, Solomon made also an house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife, like unto this porch. See, once again, so another section that would be for Pharaoh's daughter. All these were of costly stones, according to the measures of hewed stones, sawed with saws within and without, even from the foundation onto the coping, and so on the outside toward the great court. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. And above were costly stones, after the measures of hewed stones and cedars. And the great court around was round about was with 3 rows of hewn stones, and a row of cedar beams, both for the inner court of the house of the Lord Yahweh, and for the porch of the house. So now it's described, the major parts of King Solomon's palace here, and then it goes into the work that Hiram then continued, other than the building of the temple, but in terms of providing materials for us to use. But now King Solomon called him to start with the building of the actual materials that would be put in there. Right. So verse 13, the king and King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding, and cunning to work all the works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. Now it is assumed here that this Tyre is the same one, this Hiram is the same one from the previous chapters, right? That King Solomon had made a league with, King David had made a league with, continuing on here. But just for clarity here, I'm gonna pull up the other translations here. Okay. NLT says he was half Israelite, since his mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father had been a craftsman in bronze from Tyre or Tyre. Right. So in this case, his mom was an Israelite, right? But as it tells us here, his father was a man of Tyre. And without further information, right, we would have to assume or go with that his father was a heathen. And if that's the case, then that would make him also a heathen, though his mom was an Israelite. There is no such thing as like you're half Israelite, because your genealogy is determined by the seed of your father. Okay. All in all, continuing. So it says here, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding, and cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. And like I said, it's assumed that this is the same Hiram from before, right? I mean, there's still a chance that it could be somebody else by the same name, but that chance is very slim, right? What are the chances of that? Anyway, verse 15. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high apiece, and a line of 12 cubits did compass either of them about. And he made 2 chapiters of molten brass to set upon the top of the pillars. The height of the one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. And nets of checker work and wreaths of chain work for the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for one chapiter, and 7 for the other chapiter. And he made pillars and 2 rows round about upon the one network, to cover the chapiters that were upon the top with pomegranates. And when the pomegranates is not like the actual fruit, but the design. Okay, it wouldn't make sense to use the actual fruit; it would rot and decompose, and that would be unclean. Like it wouldn't be a nice thing, right? So did he for the other chapiter, and the chapiters that were upon the top of the pillars were of lily work in the porch, 4 cubits, right? So that's that design. And the chapiters upon the 2 pillars had pomegranates also above. Once again, not dealing with the literal actual fruit, but more so the design. Okay. And see if I can just take a quick. Okay, we're coming up on that. Continuing 20, over against the belly, which was by the network, and the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon the other chapiter. And he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple. And remember that these are the materials, the part of the interior design, you can say, for the temple, right? So you had these pillars and so on and so forth, the different designs. All right, and it continues. It says, and he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple, and he set up the right pillar and called the name thereof Jachin. And he set up the left pillar and called the name thereof Boaz. Now let's look into the names here, the meanings at least. So we have Jachin, which here is Yakyana or Yakayan. Let's see, either looks like a one right here, Kawan or Kaun, to be established, to be firm, to be fixed. And if we go back here, so it's a different word here, but this is the root word anyway. But it says here he will establish, okay, for the suffix kayan here, but the root word being kawan. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I believe that is a kawana. So the ya being a he, and then the kawan meaning established or fixed. And then you also have the other one here, which was called Boaz, which is Ba'iz. And we have here fleetness, right? Also the name of an ancestor of David here. Cool. So continuing, you have these two pillars, right? Jachin and Boaz, as they were called. Verse 22, and upon the top of the pillars was lily work, so was the work of the pillars finished. And he made a molten sea. Now when it says the molten sea, it's not talking about like an actual sea, but rather like a basin, like a large basin of water. Okay, let's look up here the basin or laver of water in the temple. Let me see. Let's actually look up King Solomon's temple. And here we go. So this is actually a better picture here. So you can see here, you have these oxen here, and this, I think it's 4 on each side, according to this diagram, which is 12. So you see this giant basin or laver of water here, which is referred to as the sea. So he made a molten sea, 10 cubits from the one brim to the other. It was round all about, so it was circular, and his height was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits did compass it round about. And under the brim of it round about were 3 knops compassing it. Once again, the knops being like a knob-like designs. 10 in a cubit compassing the sea round about, and the knops were cast in 2 rows when it was cast. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, and 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. All right, so that would make more sense, right? 4 times 3, 12. So this is actually a bit inaccurate. It should have been 3 instead of 4. 3, 3, 3, 3. But you get the point. You get the gist of it. And 3 looking toward the east, and the sea was set above upon them, and all their hinder parts were inward. So their heads were facing outward, their hinder parts, their backside, was more inward. And it was an hand breadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, with flowers of lilies. It contained 2,000 baths. And those were baths, I think that's a measurement of, I guess, how much this sea, right, this basin, this laver could hold. And he made 10 bases of brass. 4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, and 3 cubits the height of it. And the work of the bases were on this manner. They had borders, and the borders were between the ledges. And on the borders that were between the ledges were lions, oxen, and cherubims. And upon the ledges there was a base above, and beneath the lions and oxen were certain additions made of thin work. And every base had 4 brazen wheels and plates of brass, and the four corners thereof had undersetters. Under the laver were undersetters molten at the side of every addition. And once again, like I said, you could look up, you can see here, this like a image right here. And this would make sense to have these wheels. So you can imagine maybe this is not really mobile because of how heavy it is, but these would be mobile that could be moved around. So it says here, verse 31, and the mouth of it within the chapter and above was a cubit, but the mouth thereof was round after the work of the base, a cubit and a half. And also upon the mouth of it were gravings with their borders, fourscore not round. And under the borders were 4 wheels, and the axle trees of the wheels were joined to the base, and the height of a wheel was a cubit and half a cubit. So there you go with the wheels, right? Verse 33, and the work of the wheels was like a work of a chariot wheel. A chariot here is describing an actual like chariot, like a horse chariot, not like a flying UFO chariot, though some of them do come in circular shapes like that. Their axle trees and their naves and their felloes and their spokes were all molten. And there were 4 undersetters to the 4 corners of one base, and the undersetters were of the very base itself. And in the top of the base was there a round compass of half a cubit high, and on the top of the base of the ledges thereof and the borders thereof were of the same. For on the plates of the ledges thereof and on the borders thereof he graved cherubims, lions, and palm trees, designs once again, according to the proportion of every one, and additions round about. After this manner he made 10 bases, all of them had 1 casting, 1 measure, and 1 size. Then made he 10 lavers of brass, 1 laver contained 40 baths, and every laver was 4 cubits, and upon every one of the 10 bases 1 laver. And he put 5 bases on the right side of the house, and 5 on the left side of the house. And he set the sea on the right side of the house eastward over against the south. And Hiram made the lavers and the shovels and the basins. So Hiram made an end of doing all the work that he made King Solomon for the house of the Lord. The 2 pillars and the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were on the top of the 2 pillars, and the 2 networks to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars, and 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, even 2 rows of pomegranates for 1 network to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were upon the pillars, and the 10 bases and 10 lavers of the bases, and 1 sea and 12 oxen under the sea. So this is describing the things that Hiram built, and the pots and the shovels and the basins, and all these vessels which Hiram made to King Solomon for the house of the Lord Yahweh were of bright brass. In the plain of Jordan did the king cast them, in the clay ground between Succoth and Zarthon. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because they were exceeding many. So you can imagine there were a lot, so much that he couldn't weigh all of them. So he just didn't weigh it. Neither was the weight of the brass found out. And I'm sure the Lord had that happen deliberately, right? And Solomon made all the vessels that pertain unto the house of the Lord Yahweh, the altar of gold, and the table of gold, whereupon the shewbread was. And the candlesticks of pure gold, 5 on the right side, right? So you had the altar, right, of gold, and this was plated, like after it was built, then it was covered in gold. You had the table of gold, right, where you put the shewbread. This was in the holy place, right? Remember, there were 2 altars, one the altar of sacrifice on the outside, and the altar of incense in the holy place. And you had the candlestick of pure gold, right, the menorah as we call it, on the right side, and 5 on the left before the oracle, with the flowers and the lamps and the tongs of gold, and the oracle being the holy of holies. and the bowls and the snuffers, and the basins and the spoons, and the censers of pure gold, and the hinges of gold, both for the doors of the inner house, the most holy place, and for the doors of the house, to wit, of the temple. So was ended all the work that King Solomon made for the house of the Lord Yahweh. And Solomon brought in the things which David his father had dedicated, even the silver and the gold, and the vessels did he put among the treasures of the house of the Lord Yahweh. And that brings us to the end of the book of 1 Kings, the 7th chapter. As I mentioned, going into more of the description of the building of Solomon's palace, of the materials into the Lord's house, and sort of like that interior design along with the laver, the basins, and so on. So with that, Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Ruach HaKodesh. And until next time, Shalom.